Facebook Live. So many things to do before we can actually get to the class.
You should have a script to automate it.
Yeah, we need somebody to develop that. Okay. Almost done. Okay. Now let me share the screen. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. It is said in the beginning of Shrimad Bhagavatam that one who attentively hears Shrimad Bhagavatam and meditates on the topics given in the Bhagavatam, very quickly the Supreme Lord will become established in the heart. So this is a wonderful opportunity to, when we are reading Bhagavatam, we can prepare our consciousness that we are not just reading a book, but we are actually receiving Krishna. We are in the presence of Krishna, because Bhagavatam is non-different from Krishna. Every canto of the Bhagavatam is described as a different part of Krishna's body. Like the first two cantos are his lotus feet, and it goes onwards. And 10th canto is Krishna's smiling face. 11th and 12th canto are his crown. So we are directly in association with Krishna. Text 52, I think we started here. The foolish embodied living entity, inept at controlling his senses and mind, is forced to act according to the influence of the modes of material nature against his desires. He is like a silkworm that uses its own saliva to create a cocoon and then becomes trapped in it with no possibility of getting out. The living entity traps himself in a network of his own fruitive activities and then can find no way to release himself. Thus he is always bewildered and repeatedly he dies. So through the different examples, here it is illustrated the power of the three modes of nature. We feel that we have created a nice setup for us, a nice home and all the facilities for our enjoyment in this material world. But that is compared to this saliva of this silkworm, and it creates a cocoon, which is our cocoon here, but the living entity gets trapped because it develops attachment to different things that we accumulate in this life, in the different relationships. And it's very difficult to get out because that's what decides where we go next. This is an interesting verse because almost a similar verse appears in Bhagavad Gita, the 3rd chapter, I think the verse number 6 or 7. Nahi kashit kshanamapi jatu tishtatiya karma krit karyate hi avasa karma gune swabhava swabhavike balat. Not a single living entity can remain unengaged even for a moment. One must act by his natural tendency according to the three modes of material nature, because this natural tendency forcibly makes him work in a particular way. So one can counteract this argument that we are forced to act according to the modes of nature. So let me become inactive. Um, let me stay away from the influence of modes by not acting. But here it is being said that you cannot avoid the forces of the three modes by remaining inactive, because the nature of the living entity, the nature of the soul, is to be always active. So the mind will always be active, and when the mind is active, it will force us to act in different ways. And even that the thoughts and the desires of the mind, um, uh, they will not subside because they are driven by the forces of the three modes of nature. So one has to find another way to become free from these three modes of nature. लब्ध्वा निमित्तम अव्यक्तम व्यक्ता व्यक्तम भवत्युता यथा योनि यथा बीजम स्वभावेन बलीयसा. The fruitive activities of a living being, the fruitive activities a living being performs, whether pious or impious, are the unseen cause for the fulfillment of his desires. This unseen cause is the root for the living entity's different bodies. Because of his intense desire, the living entity takes birth in a particular family and receives a body which is either like that of his mother or his father. The gross and subtle bodies are created according to his desire. So, very wonderful explanation why a certain living entity takes birth in a certain family, a certain situation. It's not random. When we take a birth in a particular family, we have some connection with that family or a certain kind of desire that we have that will be fulfilled in that family. So, and Krishna arranges for us to take birth in that particular situation. Esha prakriti sangena purusa vipara sitsa evana chirat isha sangat viliyate. Since the living entity is associated with material nature, he is in awkward position. But if in the human form of life he is taught how to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotee, this position can be overcome. So now the remedy is given that a living entity is entangled in the forces of nature and it's impossible to overcome the forces of nature. Uh, Nobody can overcome the forces of nature because they are Krishna's energy. And who can overcome Krishna's energy? Through the power of yoga, through the power of austerity, through the power of sense control, mind control. They are not sufficient to allow us to overcome the forces of nature. The only way one can overcome the forces of nature is given here, is to associate with the Supreme Lord and his devotee. More importantly, Krishna's devotee. And then only one can become empowered to overcome the forces of nature. Okay, so let's read this purport. Who would like to read this? Anshul, would you like to read?
Sure. The word Prakriti means material nature. The Purusha may also refer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one wants to continue his association with Prakriti, the female energy of Krishna, and be separated from Krishna by the illusion, and he is able to enjoy Prakriti, he must continue in his conditional life. If he changes his consciousness, however, and associates with the Supreme original person, Purusham Sashvatam, or with his associates, he can get out of the entanglement of material nature. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Janma Karma Cha Medivyam Evam Yo Vetti Tatvata. One must simply understand the Supreme Person, Krishna, in terms of his form, name, activities, and pastimes. This will keep one always in the association of Krishna. Tyaktva Peham Punar Janma Nayati Mamiti So Arjuna. Thus, after giving up his gross material body, one accepts not another gross body, but a spiritual body in which to return home back to Godhead. Thus, one ends the tribulation caused by his association with the material energy. In summary, The living entity is an eternal servant of God, but he comes to the material world and is bound by material conditions because of his desire to lord it over matter. Liberation means giving up this false consciousness and reviving one's original service to the Lord. This return to one's original life is called mukti, as confirmed in Shrimad Bhagavatam, Muktir Hitavanyatha Rupam Surupana Vyavastita.
Thank you, Anshu. So this is a very important point. Let's take some reflections. What you guys resonated with in this purport or up to this point, just to take a step back and recollect our thoughts.
So the only way to get out of this material nature, which is very strong, if we don't turn to Krishna and become Krishna conscious, then you'll forever remain in this. The only way to get out of this entanglement is, so that's what sort of resonated well with.
Thank you, Nandakumar Prabhu. Anybody else so far?
I have a question, Prabhuji.
Yes.
So why is it called that the female energy of Krishna is Prakriti? Isn't the female energy of Krishna Radharani, who is the spiritual potency of Krishna?
Yeah, all of Krishna's energies, they are called female energies. And the word male and female, we have to kind of understand them again, because in this material world, the understanding is very limited to the body itself. And in the spiritual context, all of Krishna's energies, they are called Prakriti, right? They are all Krishna's energy, Shakti. So Krishna's Shakti, spiritual energy, the origin of all energy is Srimati Radharani. She is the source of all energies, right? She is the ultimate repository of all energies. So even the material energy is a reflection of her. It only comes from her. So therefore, she is the original female in that sense, and then all the energies are also described as female. Female means something that is enjoyed by Prakriti and Purusha. So the word male and female, again, causes confusion when we try to understand the spiritual context terms in terms of our modern language. But the words that are used in Sanskrit is Prakriti and Purusha. So Krishna is the Purusha, original Purusha, which means the original enjoyer, and Prakriti means through which he enjoys, right? The energies through which he enjoys, and through which he makes everything happen. So that's what the understanding is. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Can I just wanted to reflect. Can I go ahead?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Amrita.
Yeah, so I just want to, I just wanted to say that, when we are associated with matter, basically in the material body, the three modes of nature are extremely strong, and, they constantly, affect us. And the only way we can come out of it is with our association with Krishna, as well as, Krishna's true devotee.
Very nice reflection. Thank you, Amrita. That realization, we need that realization every single day. I mean, I can speak for myself. I need that realization every single day, because the force of material nature, the curtain of material energy is so strong that every day we remember it and then we forget it. When we go to sleep, it is said, one devotee said, Ravindra Sarup Prabhu, he's a senior disciple of Prabhupada, he said, I sleep as a devotee and I wake up as a materialist. So all our devotion basically kind of dries down while we are sleeping. And every morning, basically, we have to remind ourselves that, who am I? We have to wake up again and make our resolution again. And this is the struggle against material. But if we keep trying that, then Krishna will give us the steadiness through which we can come to him. Thank you, Amrita. Anybody else?
The
You said
part where they said that liberation is giving up false consciousness, that is what really struck a chord, like, giving
Mhm.
up everything that's associated with ego or true consciousness is association with Krishna. So anything else, anything that is concerning the Prakriti or the world, we so much give association with is all false. As long as we break those ties, we are not going to be liberated, is how I understood.
Yes, very, very nice reflection and correct understanding. Thank you, Pratibha. Anshul, go ahead.
During in the previous verses, it felt like that we are actually the slave of these three modes of nature. I mean, the slave in terms of you're bound to take action because of these three modes. So, and I was a negative thought, but still a thought that it's still like Krishna's energy. Why is it so bad? Is it bad because the more you actually get entangled with, the farther it actually takes you from the reality? Is that's why, or something else? But I think I felt it's you're entangled in these three modes. You can't ignore, because you have to take action, because you are actually in this material world, and the window of opportunity is short, in terms of there's only very specific way you can actually break this chain. So sometimes it feels like it's easy, but sometimes it's also feel like difficult, because you have to do that simple task, but a continuous task, to basically make sure that you don't attract towards the materialistic part of it. You always only focus on Krishna rather than all the sparkly things about the material nature. So that's what I understood.
Thank you, Anshul. Yeah, it's a very good reflection that the material energy by itself, it's not bad. It is Krishna's energy, it's Krishna's property, right? So no energy of Krishna can be bad. I guess it's just our consciousness, when it is attracted to the material energy as that we want to load it over. Like when we think of material energy as something that I can load over and enjoy, that's when the material energy becomes bad for us. But if we are looking at the material energy and as the property of Krishna, and that's something I can use in Krishna's service, or I can use it for Krishna's pleasure, and that same material energy becomes spiritual energy for that person, right? So like Prabhupada, he used so much money that he got from book distribution. He used that money to build temples and then spread Krishna consciousness more and more. So that material energy became spiritual energy. That became real Lakshmi. But the same money, if it was, it is looked by a person of the material world, they might think of the money as a source of doing whatever they want to do. And then that same material energy becomes a source of great frustration, a source of great suffering. So the energy itself is not bad. It is how we want to interact with it. And the material energy is there because there's some living entities always there who want to be separate from Krishna. But there is no place in this creation which is separate from Krishna. So Krishna has to create like a special place for living entities who want to kind of pretend to be separate from him. And he kind of creates this playhouse of material energy so that these living entities can understand that it is not possible to be separate from Krishna and be happy. So at some point or the other, such living entities, they come to the realization that, yeah, I have to give up this struggle for existence and turn towards Krishna. So it is designed in this way. Krishna could have designed material energy, like people ask, why didn't Krishna create the material world in a perfect way so there was no problem here, everything was good here? Krishna could have done that, but then it would become spiritual world, right? But we don't want to be, the reason we are here in this material world because we did want to be in the spiritual world. So therefore, this material world is created in such a way that it creates that illusion within us that I am God, or I am the enjoyer and I can enjoy here forever. And that's where the material energy becomes bad.
I read somewhere, Prabhu, that we were supposed to love people and use money, but we ended up love money and started using people. So I think we are doing the opposite.
Yes, that is the enjoyer mentality. Thank you. Very good quote. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Prabhuji, go ahead, Krishna.
Yeah, Prabhuji, a quick question. So, Prabhuji, how does Krishna interact with his own material energy? How does he enjoys his own material energy? And can a living entity be reached to that level where a living entity, just like Krishna is dealing with his material energy, can the living entity deal with the same level of level and same way the Krishna is dealing with his material energy? I know a living entity can never be the controller of material energy, but how does Krishna deal with it, and how can we ever like deal with the material energy in the same way?
Two very good questions. Anybody from the older group like to answer it?
Can I? I'm not. I don't know if I'm older or younger, but can I take a stab at it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think see, Krishna lets the material energy is Maya or illusion. So Krishna lets the material energy to come to him, like when he was, Bal Gopal, he would let that energy to come so that he could pretend in front of Yashoda Maya that he's scared of Yashoda Maya and all that. So he allows the material energy to come and for a like Mataji gave this very beautiful example while speaking about this, that like we play peekaboo, we hide our face, peekaboo, we hide. So basically Krishna does that kind of a role as when he uses material energy, not per se for his enjoyment, but just to manifest his pastimes in this world, in the material world.
Yeah, there's a slight correction there. Krishna never directly comes in touch with material energy, and he stays away from material energy. This is the vision. If you read the first canto, I think the 8th chapter, the first few verses, it describes how Vyasadeva, when he's in this deep lamentation, and then on the instruction of Narad Muni, he then decides to write the Bhagavatam. Then he goes into this deep meditation where he has a vision. So before he writes the Bhagavatam, he spends a lot of time meditating on Krishna. And then he has this vision of the spiritual world where he sees Krishna and all his energies. And so Krishna is right next to all his spiritual energies, but the material energy, it says Maya tad apashayam. Apashyat purusham purnam mayam tat apashayam. So Vyasadeva sees purusham purnam. Apashyat means to see. So he saw this purusham purnam, which is Krishna, with all his energies, and Maya tad apashayam. Maya was standing behind because she could not directly stand next to Krishna. So Maya is always separated from Krishna, and Krishna directly never interacts with material energy. But therefore he expands as Lord Shiva, and in the form of Lord Shiva, he interacts with material energy directly, and therefore the material energy is a reflection of Krishna's spiritual energy, which is Radharani. So Yogamaya is the original spiritual energy, and she basically arranges all of Krishna's pastimes. But the material energy, Krishna never directly interacts with. It is his energy, and he employs this energy to basically create this material world and run this material world. A devotee or a person who approaches material energy to enjoy it, they get captured by it. But a person who approaches material energy to use it in Krishna's service, that same material energy becomes Yogamaya for that person. Prabhupada says that an expert engineer can use electricity for heating or cooling, or he can convert according to the law of thermodynamics, You can convert a machine, which is a heating machine, into a cooling machine also. So that is the expertise of Krishna. And by Krishna's mercy, a devotee can also transform, or for the devotee, the material energy transforms into Yogamaya to bring that person closer to Krishna. So I think that kind of sort of addresses both your questions. A devotee can never deal with material energy in the same way as Krishna deals, because that energy is too powerful. A living entity is always very, very tiny, even compared to material energy, and he will never be powerful enough to be able to control material energy or control any of Krishna's material energy. He can just become a servant of this energy. So he can become, right now in conditioned state, we are servant of material energy. But in spiritual enlightened state, we are servant of the spiritual energy, Yogamaya.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Just one more follow-up question. So we have a false ego. Does Krishna also have an ego? How does he deal with his ego?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Good question, right? So ego is by itself is not bad. Ego means myself of identity, right? And therefore Prabhupada says false ego. So which means ego by itself is not bad. Krishna has an ego, and therefore every soul has an ego, which is a true ego. So if something is false, then there must be something which is true. So true ego means Krishna, the sense of identity. So Krishna is the supreme person, and that's his ego, personhood. Yes. So thank you, Delia. So, and because we are part of Krishna, every soul is a part of Krishna. So every soul also has that sense of personhood, right? And that is the true ego of the soul, is to always understand, as we're reading in the last purport we read, to understand and realize oneself as a servant of Krishna, or a supporting actor in Krishna's enjoyment. That is our true ego. But when we contaminate that true ego because of our misuse of our free will and think that I can enjoy myself, who needs Krishna? Then so I forget my true identity and assume a false identity of like this body and the mind. That is false ego. Is that okay, Vishal?
Yeah, thank you, Prabhuji.
So ego we must have. We are not. We can never. The soul can never get rid of the ego, because then it would be impersonal liberation. That's what impersonalists or Mayavadis, they try to get rid of the ego. Think that, oh, this ego is too bad, and I'll annihilate my personhood and annihilate my ego as a result, and I want to just merge into this Brahman effulgence and not even kind of think who I am or forget who I am. It's kind of spiritual anesthesia that you forget. You go on the table and you forget who you are. You completely forget. You kind of go to sleep almost. So impersonal liberation is like that. They want to kind of forget about the ego, but the soul can never forget about the ego. It always has the ego, true ego.
Sure, Prabhuji, but can this kind of thought come in a God himself, that I am God, I am superpower, I can do anything, I am like controller, proprietor, and like so many appliances, that kind of like egoistic kind of thing? Can Krishna ever develop this thing in himself? I don't think so, but why not? I mean, I was just thinking.
Yeah, why not? I mean, because we have a bad taste of bad controllers and bad masters. So, but if like this, just like a loving father, like let's take an example of a loving father. A loving father has the feeling of being a protector, of a maintainer, of taking care of the children, or taking care of the family, and he'll do anything. But he has that sense that, yeah, I am doing it for the benefit of my family, or whatever, right? So that sense is there. I mean, Krishna in Vrindavan, Krishna doesn't have that. He kind of, the Yogamaya covers that sense that he is God. He himself forgets that he is God. Everybody else also do not treat him as God. But as Narayan and other expansions of Vishnu, that feeling is there. Krishna knows that he's the maintainer, he's the controller, right? In Bhagavad Gita, he says so many times, right? Ahamatma Gudakesha Sarvabhutasya Sthita. In 13th chapter, he says so many places that he's the Upadrashta, Anumanta, Bharta, Bhokta, Maheshwara. Right? I'm the maintainer, I'm the controller, I'm sitting in the heart, I'm the sanctioner. So he's aware of who he is, right? So, but Krishna is always benevolent. He's always in love with all the living entities. So that sense of I am this and I am that, it's a good thing. But it becomes bad when somebody misuses that position, and he doesn't have that spiritual love for living entities.
I think
Can I
Prabhuji,
try
Yeah, go ahead, Elia.
an answer to an alternative proposed answer?
Sure.
Is that people who act egotistically, like with an overinflated sense of importance, they're behaving selfishly and thinking about themselves, and that comes from this notion of being separate. And being separate is what, like, first you're separate, and then you can consider yourself above someone else, and that's where this negative ego conception comes from. But I think that Krishna knows that he is everything and everything is Krishna, everything is his energy. So I think it's impossible. Like, we are the ones who fall into this illusion of separation, but Krishna doesn't. Krishna knows that that we are all connected to him and him to us as part of each other's energy, and isn't under this illusion. And so that's why it's impossible for Krishna to behave towards us in anything besides love.
Very wonderful answer, Elia. Yeah, it is because there's nothing. You brought a good point that this egoistic feeling comes when we think ourselves separate from somebody else, right? But for Krishna, it is impossible for him to think of himself separate from anything else or anybody else, because there's nothing separate from him. There's nothing beyond him. He's the only thing that is there. He's the only substance that is there in this whole creation. There's nothing beyond him. So it is impossible for him to think of himself separate from anything else, because there's nothing else beside him.
I think Prabhuji, I just have one point.
Yeah.
I think this perception of thinking that, hey, I am the boss is a bad thing, but like for Krishna, it's not a bad thing, because that is a true ego. It's not false ego for him, because he is everything. He is the super controller and organizer and everything. So that's not false ego for him. That is true ego. Like similarly for us to have true ego, that we are the servant, is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Like, if I draw it slightly further to the corporate world, for a CEO to think that, yes, I have the power to run this company in the right way, and uses the power in the right way to run the company in the right way, is not bad. But only when he uses that power in a bad way, then things become bad, right? So, and that's what my feeling is, that, and having that feeling that, yes, I am the boss, is not for Krishna, is not, it actually true ego. It's not false ego at all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tapas. Thank you, Delia, for bringing out these finer points.
Yeah, Prabhuji, I really like Dahlia's point where she said that everything is included. There is no separate. So similarly, like in our body, like my body, everything is included. Hand cannot have its own ego. Leg cannot have its own ego. It's the whole body as a complete.
Exactly.
So
I mean, what would happen if we started treating our hand separately from the leg? Like, if there is a pain in the hand, we ignore it. If there is a pain in the leg, we take care of it. What would that be? We can never do that. It is impossible for us to treat our different body parts in a different way. So similarly, Krishna can never treat any living entity in that egoistic manner. Wonderful points. Wonderful questions. So let me share the screen again and we can continue.
I think Tarun had a point.
Tarun Prabhu, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Basically, I like the example of the silkworm and the cocoon. When the silkworm is using his own saliva to make a cocoon in which he is getting trapped, there is a fantastic example of how we are getting trapped in our own daily materialistic life, and the only way to escape is to complete surrender to Krishna. And if we completely surrender to Krishna, possibly we'll be one day released from this cocoon and come out as a butterfly someday and get freed.
Yes, Krishna is waiting for that moment.
Yes, very
Wonderful point.
Prabhuji, I had some more questions and or reflections. This
Go ahead.
has been a very fruitful. Thanks for my notes.
Okay.
In text 52, it is what I found interesting is that it says the foolish embodied living entity, inept at controlling his senses and mind, is forced to act according to the influence of the modes of nature against his desires. I thought that's really interesting because doesn't it seem like in the material nature, like we're just driven by our desires and that's what we need to work on. But here, I think that maybe when it says against his desires, I don't understand. Is it like against the soul's real desires, or is it that like even the embodied being has desires that are frustrated by the modes themselves, even though we have them?
Very good point. Let's read this again. The foolish embodied living entity. So when it says the foolish embodied living entity, it's pointing to the soul. Inept at controlling his senses. So when it is embodied, the soul is basically inept at controlling his senses and mind, is forced to act according to the influences of the three modes of nature against his desires. So it's both those answers that you gave. It is the soul has spiritual desires, but because those desires are so covered over by the covering of the material nature that he's not even aware of his desires. Like most people, like when you approach them for some spiritual knowledge, they say, I'm not interested, I'm okay, right? So we get this, and then we can see that in ourselves. I can see that in my own self. The spiritual desires are not fully manifest yet. So it's almost like against our desires. And also the second point you mentioned is also valid, that we have so many material desires, and the forces of modes of nature, they take us in so many different directions against our material desires. So we are kind of frustrated in both ways.
Thank you. And then another question. It says that people cannot be free from the modes of material nature, but what about, for example, Jiva Muktis? Are they still subject to the gunas?
Jivan Muktas?
Yes.
Jivan Muktas are people who are still have a material body, but they are liberated, or they're while living in this body, they are liberated, like pure devotees of the Lord. They are Jivan Muktas. And we can also become Jivan Muktas once our consciousness is fully pure. So the modes of nature, they do not act on the Jivan Mukta in the same way they act on a Baddha, like one who's entangled. The modes of nature, because at this point, material energy has turned into Yogamaya for such a person. So he will not be, at the same time, such person will go through like old age and disease, like we see in the life of Prabhupada. He went through old age, he went through disease, right? And then you can see his life. He went through many difficulties with his health, and especially when he was leaving the body. But you can see that he's getting old and he's getting like severely diseased also did not impact his service to Krishna. His remembrance of Krishna became stronger and stronger, right? So the three modes of nature, they act in such a way to enhance the bhakti of that person and bring them closer to Krishna rather than taking them away from Krishna.
Thank you.
But to an outsider, it will seem that, yeah, this person, what's the big deal? Jivan Mukta, he also died, he also had diseases. So how can a spiritual person have a disease and die if his body is spiritual? But this is just to keep the sanctity of devotional service special. There are situations where some very particular devotees, they, in their same body, without getting old or whatever, they go back to the spiritual world, like Dhruv Maharaj. And in recent times, there was a great saint in Maharashtra called Tukaram, and in broad daylight, in front of everybody, This has been recorded, like a chariot came from the spiritual world and he just went into that chariot. But those are rare exceptions where such a pure devotee will live in the same body as everybody else. Normally, to keep the sanctity of devotional service and not make it a cheap thing, and Krishna lets such pure devotees just die in a natural way, just like everybody else. So people don't take devotional service in a cheap way.
Regarding material energy and spiritual energy, would it be correct to say that spiritual energy encompasses or includes material energy? No, like material energy, yeah, material and energy includes spiritual energy, like within it and throughout it, but spiritual energy does not touch material energy. I don't know if I'm being clear.
You want to understand the relationship between material energy and spiritual energy, right? Essentially. So Prabhupada describes the material energy as a shadow of spiritual energy, right? Shadow. A shadow doesn't have substance. And it's always dependent on the real thing to exist, right? So material energy is described like that. It doesn't really have any substance. There's no real substance to anything made from material energy because it is shadow energy. But at the same time, because it's not just a pure shadow, it is conscious. So according to Krishna's will, the same material energy can transform into spiritual energy for the person. So person to person, the same energy can be material, the same energy can be spiritual. So it's a fluid situation. It's not like a constant, right? It's not a constant. Like as we progress in devotional life, our relationship to this material world changes, right? How we perceive things, how we perceive all the different things of this world, it changes. Initially, we see this material and everything in this world as, oh, how can I enjoy it? And then slowly, as we make progress, then we start seeing the same things in a different way. How can I use it in Krishna service? That thought starts coming, and then we start using it. Same material energy changes for us. So it's a very fluid situation.
I have more questions about like the metaphysics. Can I ask you and Vidarbha Mataji
Sure.
some other time, maybe?
You can ask the questions so that way others can also think about the questions, and then we can discuss the answers later.
Okay. Well, one of the questions, how does Krishna enjoy his own material energy that I was asked earlier? I was thinking, you mentioned that spiritual energy never touches material energy. So how does Krishna enjoy his own material energy? Is through relationship, is through like this symbolic relationship between Radharani and Krishna. It's like, okay, sorry, my mind is just, it's going all over the place. Yeah, I'll write later. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. No problem. So let me share, and then we can continue again. Okay, so now it's describing how Ajamil was in the beginning of his life. In the beginning, this Brahmana named Ajamil studied all the Vedic literatures. He was a reservoir of good character, good conduct, and good qualities. Firmly established in executing all the Vedic injunctions, he was very mild and gentle, and he kept his mind and senses under control. Furthermore, he was always truthful. He knew how to chant the Vedic mantras, and he was also very pure. Ajamil was very respectful to his spiritual master, the fire god, guests, and all the elderly members of his household. Indeed, he was free from false prestige. He was upright, benevolent to all living entities, and well behaved. He would never speak nonsense or envy anyone. So these are the qualities of a true Brahman. We can see this is what makes a Brahman, not by birth, but by qualities. So these qualities are described here, that he was living a very clean life. Once this Brahmana, Ajamil, following the order of his father, went to the forest to collect fruit, flowers, and two kinds of grass called Samit and Kusha. On the way home, he came upon a Shudra, a very lusty fourth-class man who was shamelessly embracing and kissing a prostitute. The Shudra was smiling, singing, and enjoying as if this were proper behavior. Both the Shudra and the prostitute were drunk. The prostitute's eyes were rolling in intoxication, and her dress had become loose. Such was the condition in which Ajamil saw them. So this is the impact of this kind of association. Even for a few seconds or few minutes, it really contaminated Ajamil's consciousness. This was a rare scenario in that age, but in today's day and age, this is such a common thing. So it's that much harder to protect our consciousness. The Shudra, his arm decorated with turmeric powder, was embracing the prostitute. When Ajamil saw her, the dormant lusty desires in his heart awakened, and in illusion he fell under their control. So this is how the desires are, they come out. And even though outside we may be doing so many things, but if we have not practiced bhakti properly, then those desires may come out at the appropriate time. And it can bewilder, even in any kind of soul, it can bewilder them. As far as possible, he patiently tried to remember the instructions of the Shastras, not even to see a woman, because he was a brahmachari. Brahmachari means a celibate student. With the help of this knowledge and his intellect, he tried to control his lusty desires. But because of the force of Cupid within his heart, he failed to control his mind. So this is the power of material energy. And all our knowledge and intellect is not sufficient, and therefore some higher power is needed, which will be described, which is the power of bhakti. Only bhakti can take care of this lust in the heart, and this lust is the reason why we are here. And lust is basically our desire to enjoy this material energy in so many different forms.
Yes.
In the same way that the sun and moon are eclipsed by a lower planet, the Brahmana lost all his good sense. Taking advantage of the situation, he always thought of the prostitute, and within a short time, he took her as a servant in his house and abandoned all the regulative principles of a Brahmana. Thus, Ajamil began spending whatever money he had inherited from his father to satisfy the prostitute with various material presentations so that she would remain pleased with him. He gave up all his Brahminical activities to satisfy the prostitute. Because his intelligence was pierced by the lustful glance of the prostitute, the victimized Brahmana Ajamil engaged in sinful acts in her association. He even gave up the company of his beautiful young wife, who came from a very respectful Brahmana family. Although born of a Brahmana family, this rascal, bereft of intelligence because of the prostitute's association, earned money somehow or other, regardless of whether properly or improperly, and used it to maintain the prostitute's sons and daughters. So it's describing he's progressively doing like things which are more and more materialistic as his life passes. This Brahmana irresponsibly spent his long lifetime transgressing all the rules and regulations of the body scripture, holy scripture, living extravagantly and eating food prepared by a prostitute. Therefore, he is full of sins. He is unclean and is addicted to forbidden activities. So now the Yamadutas are actually giving the account of Ajamil against the Vishnuduta actually is sinful, and there cannot be any bigger sinner than him. And therefore it is said like food, Prabhupada mentions in many places that food carries the consciousness of the person who prepares it. So when we just eat here and there or from anybody, then that consciousness, we inherit that consciousness. And so one should be careful in terms of eating food. And best is to offer the food to Krishna and eat, because then Krishna's consciousness will enter our consciousness. This man Ajamil did not undergo atonement. Therefore, because of his sinful life, we must take him into the presence of Yamaraj for punishment. There, according to the extent of his sinful acts, he will be punished and thus purified. So this is like their concluding argument, that this person was very sinful, and also he did not perform any atonement. So therefore, he is the ripe candidate to be taken and punished by Yamaraj. And then they kind of rest their case here at the end of this chapter. So I think maybe Wednesday we'll start with the counter arguments by the Vishnu Dutas, and they will present. So we'll just start a couple of shlokas. Sukadeva Goswami said, "My dear king, the servants of Lord Vishnu are always very expert in logic and arguments. After hearing the statements of Yamadutas, they replied as follows." So if you follow the arguments of Yamadutas, they're quite sound. Nobody can kind of counteract those arguments because they are speaking from the Vedas, and they are defining what is sin and what is pious activity. And they gave a full account of Ajamil and why he was sinful. Sounds very, very reasonable and logical. And but the anticlimax will come when we hear the arguments of Vishnu Dutas, which they will present here. So we'll just read up to here. Vishnu Dutta said, "Alas, how painful it is that irreligion is being introduced into an assembly where religion should be maintained. Indeed, those in charge of maintaining the religious principles are needlessly punishing a sinless, unpunishable person." So this is something for you guys to meditate. Why Ajamil was described as sinless and completely, he didn't perform any sins. So this is something food for thought. What he did is in front of you. Why the Vishnu Dutas are describing him as completely sinful, a sinless person.
Who are they referring to when they say in charge of religious principles here in this?
Yamadutas, because Yamaraj is in charge of religious principles, and Yamadutas being his representative, they are also.
Okay.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, what is the clear definition of a sin in Vedas or in like any place? Is there any verse where we can go and refer the clear definition of a sin?
I have to think about that. I can't think of on top of my head a particular verse, but Papam ultimately is our turning away from Krishna. That is the original sin or Papam, when we turn away from Krishna. And then everything else follows from that. Like for example, somebody kills somebody, or somebody cheats somebody, somebody exploits somebody, right, like that. There's so many different activities. All of them, they fall under this original activity of turning away from Krishna. That's why people do those things, because they're not aware of who they are and why they are doing it.
So anything, if you act against the scriptural injunctions, then you are committing a sin. Is that correct? Or?
Well, that's again not the scriptural injunctions, but when we are acting against Krishna's will, when we are acting against Krishna's instructions, that is sin. Like Arjuna, you can see he was actually doing the same thing in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. He was presenting his own arguments, but that was against Krishna's will. So, and therefore it was, if he had not fought, then that would have been sinful for him. If he had not fought based on his own arguments. So when we go against Krishna's will, that is sin. So scriptural injunctions again is a broad term, because the scriptures, they give so many injunctions for people at different levels. So we cannot just say what could be a sin for somebody may not be a sin for somebody else, depending on who you are. For example, somebody who's addicted to eating meat, then the Shastra describes that such a person can eat meat maybe once a month, offer particular worship to goddess Kali, and offer the goat and chant certain mantras, and then that is considered as okay. This is not sinful for such a person, but he's already in such a low position that that injunction is given to uplift that person to a more higher platform. But that same injunction is not applicable to a Brahmana. A Brahmana cannot go and say, okay, once a month I will offer a goat to Kali and eat it. A Brahmana cannot do that. For him, that will be sinful. So we have to understand scriptural injunctions are given for particular time, place, and circumstance. But the original injunction is that always remember Krishna and never forget him. That is the sum total of all pious activity. That is the highest injunction. And if somebody goes against that, then they are involved in some level of sin. Sin means something that takes us away from Krishna. Asunder. Asunder means to separate. So something that takes away from Krishna.
Like eating meat and taking intoxicants and harming his creation, whether in the form of not physically, even in form of your words or your actions, all that takes you away from Krishna.
Yeah, I mean, those are some prominent ones, but there's so many things that we do that can take us away from Krishna. Even as practicing devotees, we can be doing things and that create that duplicity in our heart. So rather than judging who is sinful and who is not, I guess it's best to look into our own heart and that where am I disconnected from Krishna? Or why am I disconnected from Krishna? That's what I want to look at.
Like Prabhuji, for a cat to eat a rat is not a sin, but for a human being to eat meat is sin. Like, I mean, the way I understand is for a second grader to not solve a calculus problem is not a bad thing, but for a PhD student not being able to solve a math PhD student not being able to solve a calculus problem is a bad thing. So I mean, as you said, time, place, and situation decides the level of purity that you're supposed to demonstrate in your life.
Yes, very nice example. Thank you.
I think if we indulge in sense gratification, I think that takes us away from Krishna.
Yes. And so it may seem like a benign thing, right, to somebody. I'm not harming anybody. I'm just enjoying. What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? Like, for example, two consenting people may come together and just enjoy their bodies with mutual consent, without any regulations or whatever. So they may say, I'm not harming anybody, I'm just enjoying. So what's wrong with it? How is it sinful? And but there are so many situations we can come in life that, yeah, this may seem like it is okay, but I guess the bottom line is this activity taking me away from Krishna? And that's how we can measure whether it is. But sometimes the word sin is like a too strong a word, and it's like kind of gives like this guy is sinful and he's going to hell and all that kind of a judgmental energy. But I guess we can understand it from a more self-reflective situation where what is it that I can do so my consciousness is more fixed on Krishna? That's what I like to do. Refine my consciousness so it is more and more focused on Krishna.
I think sin is anything that pulls us back into the illusion of into sense gratification, and the desire for sense gratification comes from the illusion of separation where we want to fulfill our own desires. And I think a big problem in thinking about sin, it's good to think about sin, I think, if you're thinking about your own sin. But I think the problem is that we are paying too much attention trying to figure out someone else's sin instead of looking at ourselves.
Yes. Because we don't see our sins. I mean, a conditioned soul thinks that I am perfect. And whatever little problems I have, I can have a justification for them because this guy did this to me, and that's why I am like this. Or whatever problems I have, it's not a big deal. But everybody.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Can I say in Hindi?
हाँ बोलिए.
वो बोलते हैं ना कहावत है कि जिस चीज को छुपा के करना पड़े वो पाप है.
So she's saying that whatever, if you have to do, if you have to hide and do something, then that thing is sinful.
हरे कृष्ण प्रभु जी.
Hare Krishna, Praneshwari Mata.
जब हमारी आत्मा अपने को कोई काम करने के लिए मना करे, उसके अगेंस्ट हम कर लेते हैं, वो एक sin होता है. कभी कभी हमें अंदर से एक आवाज आती है कि इट इज रॉन्ग, और हम उसके अगेंस्ट जो भी करते हैं वो एक sin होता है एक प्रकार से.
Yes, very nice point. She's saying that when we do something against our own conscience, then our conscience speaks to us, and when we go against it, then that's sinful. So anybody else? Any other thoughts, comments?
I just had a question. If Ajamila was a Brahmin, Prabhuji, why did he go and visit a prostitute? Because being a Brahmin, he's supposed to follow those injunctions, right? That he doesn't eat meat, doesn't take the intoxicants, doesn't visit, women of ill repute, and he doesn't gamble. So if he was a Brahmin, he should be following all this. How did he find himself in the company of such a person, is my question.
Yeah, as described, that he went to the forest to collect some fruits and flowers. On the way back home, in the forest, he saw this Shudra enjoying with this prostitute. So he tried not to look, but maybe he just glanced at them for a few seconds. And that was enough to contaminate his heart. And he again looked away, went back home, and thinking that I will not think of it. But then he kept thinking about it. The thought kept coming back to him. And next day he again went and again looked at them, now for a little bit longer time. Third day he again went, now again looked at them even for a longer time. And then finally thinking, feeling, and willing, and finally decided, okay, I need to have association with this prostitute. So it happened over a period of time. And that is the power. A Brahmana is, and therefore we can see that any of these positions, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, these are all varnas. And they are not sufficient to protect us from the influence of this material nature. And the only thing that can protect us from that influence of material nature is bhakti. So the Ajamil was lacking bhakti at that time. He had not fully developed in his bhakti. He was just a celibate brahmachari serving his father, and he had not fully developed. I don't know the full story of his life, but whatever little I know, he was not fully developed. But at the same time, he performed some devotional service also. So that came to his rescue in the end, and that allowed him to continue again.
But just like Vishwamitra, who was a great sage, he also fell in a trap, entrapped with seeing a beautiful woman.
Yes, yes. So being a yogi, being a austere person, being a brahmana, none of this is a guarantee. But we see that how Haridas Thakur, who was a pure devotee, and Maya, a material energy, herself came dressed as a beautiful prostitute to lure him, but she could not lure him. He was so fixed in the holy name and Krishna that he actually transformed her into a devotee. So if you want protection against Maya, then we just have to become better devotees. We have to take better shelter of the holy name, better shelter of Krishna. And then naturally we'll develop the higher taste, and those things will not be interesting to us anymore. The problem is right now the heart is not so interested in Krishna. Or maybe it's a little bit interested, but it's also interested in so many other things. And the process of bhakti is getting rid of those other things in our heart in which it is interested, and bringing our focus a day at a time, an hour at a time, back to Krishna, back to Krishna. And it's not going to happen in one day, but in the association of devotees, it can happen. And that's why we need the association of devotees all the time, because our mind will take us away. No matter who we are, mind will take us away. And therefore Prabhupada said that even when we advance to higher levels, we have to be always careful of Maya. Prabhupada said he himself prayed in front of the deities every day, Krishna, please protect me from the influence of your material energy. So that is something that is applicable to all of us.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Deval.
I just thought it was interesting, this particular line, when the Vishnu Datta said, alas, how painful it is that irreligion is being introduced into an assembly where religion should be maintained. Indeed, those in charge of maintaining the religious principles are needlessly punishing a sinless, unpunishable person. And it's interesting to hear, that they are actually referring to some of the other deities, and then in Ajamila's situation, and how it makes me think about the story about Jesus. And there was a story about Jesus where they talk about how he came to heal a man that was sitting beside these pools of water that were healing waters, but he couldn't get in because he was crippled from the waist down. And he went to go heal him, and he healed him. And he walked off, and he didn't even ask for Jesus' name or anything. He walked off, and some of the high priests, he was near the temple. Some of the high priests asked him who healed you, because on that particular day it was a Saturday. So in the Christian tradition and in the Jewish tradition, they don't do any work on Saturdays, which is considered the Sabbath day. So they said, well, who did this? This is completely against the law. And he went and found the blind man went and found Jesus, because he got scolded by the high priest. And he told him who he was, and he said just don't sin again, and don't do this again. And then the guy went back to the high priest, and he told him who it was, and he approached the high priest, approached Jesus, and said, why did you do this work on this Sabbath? This is completely against the law. It's outrageous. And he said, if one of your livestock were injured, would you not proceed to help your livestock? I think he used a donkey in this instance as an example. And the high priest just stood there, bewildered at that, because he thought about it like, this is common sense. This is common sense things, having compassion and helping one another, And but I had a question too, and I think you went into this. Who are the Vishnu Dutas, and what are they? Who are they?
They are associates of the Supreme Lord, and they are Krishna's in the Vaikuntha planets in the spiritual world. They are Krishna's attendants. They are Krishna's servants, and they look like Lord Vishnu. They have 4 arms, and they almost look like Lord Vishnu, and they travel throughout the whole creation just to take care of devotees. So I just wanted to mention that on Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, we'll have His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu, who came earlier in our sessions. So he will be coming and giving a class on the Bhagavad Gita, because this is a special month of Gita Jayanti. So please come and join us, and share with other people that you know to come and join his session on this Sunday, December 13th, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. That will be what time in India? 6:30 p.m. in India.
Yeah.
6:30 p.m. in India, Sunday. Thank you all. We'll see you on Sunday morning.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Prabhu.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.